Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to be looking at the weekly metagame breakdown for the standard best of one format. We're going to look at the highest win rate decks on the arena ladder up to Mythic Rank, and then we're going to be looking at kind of the diversity of decks that you might encounter on the ladder as well. As always, we get the data from Untapped GG, what you see on the screen, companion tool that runs alongside Arena's client, aggregates user win rates, including your own, so you could track your own win rates. And then puts together a whole bunch of stats that we can take a look at to see how kind of trends are happening. Since it's the beginning of a ladder reset, we're going to be focusing a mix of Diamond to Mythic. We could start looking at Platinum to Mythic because that's where most people will kind of be reset, and we'll kind of look at the distributions there. A link for Untapped if you want to use it is in the video description, and then I will paste all these deck lists with timestamps so you can copy paste your heart's content. So we'll kind of go through here. Foundations pre-release is going to be later this week into the weekend when you're watching this. So I'll be playing in a bunch of pre-releases this weekend, kind of getting a feel for the new set, and then we'll be back with new metagame breakdown content when the new set releases. So we'll do first drops of all the new decks that are coming out from the new set. So make sure to subscribe to keep up to date with all the new metagame analysis. So let's jump in and look at the popularity of decks. Boros Auras at 12.6%. Mono Reds had a big increase. This deck's been quite powerful for me as well. I was playing a bit of this offline, and we can kind of look at the jump of Mono Red where it was as low as like 1%, and now it's come up to 7.7. Now notably, this is Mono Red, not Leyline. This is the one from Worlds. It's a much creature dense version, more traditional kind of Mono Red kind of facets. Dimir Control, which is like the Demon combo deck at 6%. Red Aggro, which is basically a variation of the Boros Auras deck with Fling effects. Mono Black Discard at about 5%, and then Golgari Mid about 5%, Mono Black Midrange about 5%, and Azorius Oculus. So I made a comment last week, like I was skipping over the discard decks. They have always a high play rate, but they're always like sub 55% win rate. I generally cap it at about 55% as like the lower bound of what we're looking at. People just really like playing the deck. Nothing against that. This is a game. Play the decks you enjoy. Just relative to like what happens is you're playing a deck with a bunch of cards that are good in your first couple turns, but having discard against a deck like Mono Red, like I could dump my hand on turn 2, 3, that it doesn't really matter what you take of the discard, and then later game you're drawing these discard effects that don't have much play. If you want to play Mono Black, play like the kind of mid-range slasher versions. They tend to be a little bit more consistent just because they have a density of threats. But yeah, we see Mono Red kind of come up. There's a slight decrease in like the Dimir Control decks, and then everything else is kind of grouped together. Nothing like huge trends. The discard deck did see a slight decline, but with ladder reset, you usually see everybody kind of shift towards aggro because there's that rush to Mythic. If we're looking kind of to Diamond just really quickly, we see Mono Red much more represented here, 17%. Boros, so it's kind of the folks pick up the more aggressive decks early and then kind of go from there. But we'll jump into it. We'll take a look. From Diamond to Mythic, we have 150,000 games played, and the highest win rate deck is actually Selesnya Auras, so 72%. So I've been playing some variations of this deck as well. Notably, you have Toadstool Admirer, which has Ward. I was also playing, there's a 2-mana 3/1 with Ward. I was playing that instead of Slumbering Keepguard. The Ward is very effective of just kind of slowing down your opponents. It kind of taxes the removal that you can then get it at a cut down range. It gives you kind of a clean way to kind of put Sheltered onto Ghosts. The Slumbering Keepguard is kind of interesting. So it allows some card selection in terms of enchantments entering the battlefield, and then it does allow you to mana sink to pump it up. You do have ways to give Trample with Audacity as well as Hunter's Talent, so it could be a nice mana sink there, but it's kind of got its core of the Auras deck: Sheltered by Ghost, Ethereal Armor, Optimistic Scavenger, Shardmade Rescue for protection. This version as well of the deck has Calyx Guided by Fate. This will allow you to have another kind of Enchantress style effect where enchantments entering the battlefield put 1/1 counters, including Calyx, and then if an enchanted creature you control deals combat damage, or Calyx does, you get to create a copy. So you can copy like Sheltered by Ghosts. So I was copying Hunter's Talent to have multiple removal effects. Ethereal Armor is really nice to kind of counter on that effect. Then lastly, there's Danitha, New Benalia's Light. 3 mana 2/2, Vigilance, Trample, Lifelink, and then once during your turn, you may cast an aura equipment from your graveyard. I honestly found this card pretty mediocre. I ended up cutting it. I found, especially with the meta being quite aggressive, you usually want to interact a little bit sooner. Starting to get your ball rolling, like Calyx is a threat because it immediately puts counters on things, and then it threatens if you have an existing creature to start copying stuff. I just found this one pretty weak overall, but in that shell. This version's also on 4 Valgavoth Slayer. I didn't love having this card in. I ended up trimming down to, I think, 1 or 2, and then eventually I just kind of phased it out just for a couple of the Restless Prairies instead. While this is an enchantment, you have a lot of 1-drops. You want to curve out, and then you do have somewhat of a mana intensive, just having the right colors on curve. So that was my thought on it. But I was like, I'd win 5 in a row, I'd lose 5 in a row. I found like the deck lost to itself more than anything. It's slower, so you can go bigger than the Boros version. I find with this one, with Calyx and stuff, I found it slower than the Boros version, as well as you don't have the 2-mana fly like enchantment. I think that one's pretty good at breaking like the parity. There's a lot of times my opponent had something with flying, like a slick shot, and then they just kind of bait me that way there. Gruul Prowess at 64%. So this is the Innkeeper's Talent version, speaking of slick shot. So this one's just kind of the traditional Prowessy shell. You have the full mouse package, Manifold Mouse in here, Emberheart Challenger, Heartfire Hero. This one's on some Might of the Meeks for trample. No leyline in this one, just playing a more aggressively slanted version. The mana base here is a little dated. You can get rid of Thran Portal and the Forest, and then play a couple Verges. You can usually go up to 3 to 4, depending on how you kind of orient the rest of your mana base. You're going to still keep the Ridgeline in and the Rock-based Village, then just play 2 Verges. Just change these with Verge, which I'll do when I paste the deck list itself. This one's also got Witch Stalker, which isn't always common in the main, but it's just another cheap removal spell in the context of just having attacking creatures. Boros Auras, 63%. So this has been pretty stock for a couple weeks now. The card I was mentioning earlier was Feather Flight to give evasion. This helps kind of in the ground stall. This version's on 2 Swift Spheres, and then Heartfires, Scavengers, the whole kind of mouse package for double strike. Very powerful in this shell here. Sheltered by Ghost, again, is the big card that's pushed these aura strategies kind of over the top, while the Shardmage Rescue is nice as protection. This just being removal, as well as a ward, tax, and lifelink could really swing the direction of the matches. And just enchantments kind of coming across. We got the Azorius flavor. So this one's a little bit more mid-rangey in a way. So you're not going to go as explosive, but you have things like Entity Tracker, which provides more sustained card advantage. A lot of these like Boros ones and Gruul ones, if you have like a well-timed kind of sweeper, you kind of have to go a little bit more all in, where this one has a lot more ways to draw cards. You have access to 6 protection effects, the Shardmage Rescue, as well as Fate of Flight. Gremlin Tamer could be an engine on its own to go wide. Inquisitive Glimmer is cost reduction. Edict is another way to just add a bunch of counters. And then Silent Hall Creeper as an evasive threat, make it really big. Unblockable, and then can copy something else as well as draw some cards. You also get access to some really nice mana, including Restless Anchorage, which is one of the better creature lines that you have available in these kind of aggressive shells. Then go to Mono Red Aggro, 61%, 23,000 games played. So I've been having a lot of fun with this deck. It's very, very aggressive. Tons of 1-drops. The Rock-based Village plays really nicely with whether it be your Valiant triggers, off like Emberheart Challenger, Heartfire Hero, even just giving Hired Claw, a way to kind of get haste because it's a lizard, and this works with lizards and mice. Traditionally, we've seen it more played with the mice decks. No love for raccoons though. You have 8 pieces of kind of targeted removal, but also could go face, and 3 copies of Lightning Strike. Nemesis is pretty solid in these aggressive mirrors because it often could lead to 2-for-1 situations. The one thing that I was been experimenting with that's kind of helped, I kept running into like a lot of black decks more recently, just like heavy removal style decks. This deck, it's not as fast as a Leyline deck. Like you can definitely put out power. Leyline has obviously turn 2 capabilities. This version is much more susceptible to creature removal, including sweepers, because you are a little bit slower on curve. Like Lockdown becomes more of a threat, like even some of the more expensive sweepers. I ended up trimming one Witch Stalker and one Screaming Nemesis for 2 of the red cases. I've liked it so far, just giving you that kind of additional card advantage, looting, stuff like that. It's very easy to kind of, oddly enough, flood in this deck. You could also even potentially trim a land and then just keep like either the full Nemesis and trim down to 2 stock, like Witch Stalker Frenzies, and play 2 cases that way there. You can try out something like that. We have Selesnya Rabbits. So someone got, so this one's at 59%. We haven't seen Rabbits in a while. Synapse got to number 36 Mythic with it, with what looks like this list. And Rabbits kind of has a comeback. It was having a really hard time against the Leyline decks. It was like a turn or two too slow before kind of getting the engine going. You can have very explosive starts with things like Valley Might Caller into like either a bunch of 1-drops or like just kind of curving out, hop to it into this is very strong. Even just like Valley Might Caller into like another 1-drop. Phineas for some card advantage in there. Valley Quest Caller sets up your stuff. This gets very big, has Trample. 1 Sanguine Evangelist, 3 War Leaders. The version from Synapse was actually 2/2, so that might be one of the changes you want to make. Phineas does kind of have diminishing returns given that it's a legendary. 1 Season of Burrow on the top end, and then Knight Errant of Eos kind of mixed into there. You have a bunch of the utility lands in the villages included here, as well as Cavern of Souls. Just be mindful with Cavern. Some of these, like this is a Frog Warrior, this is a Vampire Cleric, this is a Human Knight. So you do have, depending on your selection, a lot of these rabbits. So they're kind of all over the place. Warrior is something you can name depending on the composition of your hand. Like these are all warriors to kind of get your 1-drops. Warrior. This one's a knight. This one's a knight. This one's an archer. This one's a soldier for whatever reason. Soldier, knight, you make it up, but that's kind of just something to keep an eye out there. We have a pretty stock Lizards list, 59%. Again, just kind of the Leyline deck slowing things down, just a more traditional. Your removal, things like the Go for the Throats, cut downs become a little bit more viable. Lots of just various types of ping style effects here. Engines of Laughing Jasper Flint, Valley Flame Caller, more ping effects. You can kind of shift the Flame Caller to the 3-mana kind of Thoughtseize one as well with Menace, depending on where the meta is. With the meta being a little bit more aggressive, you want to kind of race more often. Scales of Shale is really nice, just a way to have big swings in terms of lifelink with your creatures as well. Now, this here, this deals damage to an opponent. So you can scale a Shale's your Gev, give it lifelink, and then cast a creature, and then the damage that it would deal that's non-combat would also gain life in that case there, which is kind of a cool interaction. Azorius Oculus, 59%. So they finally have listened. I've been telling people for weeks, play Afara's Dispersal, play into the Flood Maw, just build the deck more inclined to the best of 1 meta, have a little bit more interaction. One's also got a Shore Up, just kind of trimming on the churn to have more interaction with your opponent. Your threats are going to beat mono red in these aggressive decks. You just want to be able to bounce your creatures. Afara's Dispersal can also target your own, so depending what they do, you can also bounce your creatures. It helps set up your Surveil that can put cards into your graveyard that give you more chances of hitting either your Jhin or Oculus into your graveyard, which is kind of sweet. But Recommission, Helping Hand are the ways you reanimate. Oculus, Haughty Jhin are your primary win conditions in the deck. We then go, if it decides to load. All right. Mono White didn't want to load first, but we got it. So Mono White's at 57%. Just kind of the current iteration. The Boros version of the deck was a bit lower, all things considered. With this version, it's basically a port of the best 3 version. The best 3 version is playing Elegant Parlor because it has Imidane's Recruiter for these kind of mid-range mirrors in the side. You can actually take these out and just play more planes. It just reduces the number of tap lands that you have in the deck, and then you still get the same count for laydown arms. Enduring Innocence acts as another Caretaker to draw you a bunch of cards, Sanguine Evangelist. So you have kind of like a mid-rangey control elements. No sweepers in this one, but a lot of cheap interaction mixed into the deck. Full set of Bezas, your Archangels, and then Sunfalls on the top end. You have the Engine of Fountainport kind of mixed into there. Then go to Dimir Control. So We have a demon deck. This one here, lots of kind of card churn. This is one of the decks I lost to. It's just, I had so much card selection with the treasure maps against the Aura deck, just to kind of churn through. Seeing nowhere to run an Edict as kind of a concession to these ward style effects, as well as like protection and Shard Mage Rescue. This kind of gets around that. Sweepers and Deadly Cover Up. The predominant win condition is cast Doomsday Excruciator, have Jace, and then mill out your opponent. You have Restless Reef as another way to do so. And just literally like every removal piece. Annoying with Affliction, nowhere to run, Sheoldred's Edict, Cut Down, Disfigures, Hand Hate, some bounce in there. 3 steps ahead is a counter that can also help draw and kind of churn through your deck as well. And then move to 4-color Domain. This is another deck that I think is a good build, that it's respecting the meta that is best of 1 as opposed to just copying a best of 3. So this is a Zur version of the deck. So it's kind of Abzan blue, if we want to call it. Into the Flood Maw, Annoying with Affliction, nowhere to run, all cheap interaction, temporary lockdown, Leyline Binding, Sunfall. Overlord of the Hauntwoods, as well as Zur the Eternal in here. The Zur can animate any of these effects. Matraxas, Herd Migrations, Overlord, 1 Virtue. This one's kind of interesting. So you have Walk-in Closet, Forgotten Cellar. Just as kind of a Crucible Worlds effect, you can play lands from your graveyard. In this case here, I don't see how you're necessarily getting the lands in your graveyard. Fable Passage, I guess. You can just kind of bank off that. And then when you unlock the store, you may cast spells from your graveyard this turn. If you put a card from anywhere, you basically exile it. So like a Yawgmoth's Bargain kind of effect. You do have to pay 5 to get going. So there's a limit on how many cards you can play. There's also the Moldering Gym Wait Room. So searches for a land and kind of Manifest Dread. I think you're probably better off just playing, instead of this type of effect, so the benefit here, there was the one from the previous set, the food one, which gained you life when you sacked it. These ones here, because they could stick around and you can animate it with Zur, they have a big CMC. So Zur cares about base power and toughness equal to its mana value. So like this mana value would be 8, so you have an 8/8, and then you would have a 9/9. So it does kind of play nicely with that effect. So might be something worth trying out to see how it is, but I think these are a little bit lower impact than a lot of the other cards in the deck. And then lastly, so this player here, Paunchy Panda with Dimir midrange, went 64 and 35. It's kind of interesting. Deck seems really poorly positioned against mono red, but beating up on auras, pretty much beating up on every other deck except like the Gruul deck. This one here, we have kind of the Kaido tempo elements. So we have Blood Pit Drowner as a way to tap things down. You have some counter spells, Spyglass Siren, Mockingbird can kind of copy effects there too. Cheat into play Kaido, kind of go to town that way. Deep Cavern Bat as a way to kind of disrupt their hand. Full set of Unholy Annex in here, but no demons, which is kind of interesting. So using the card advantage and then just the Ritual Chamber itself as the demon. And best of 1, you might just want to trim like 1 copy of this, maybe bring in another cut down. You might even want to go like 2 cards here and then just play like the full set of cut downs. There's ways you can kind of tweak some of these numbers in this case. Even just playing like Anoint with Affliction as another removal spell could be reasonable. And interesting kind of deck that seeing, so, like you don't usually see the Unholy Annex in the tempo version of the deck. In any case, let me know what you've been playing, what you've been enjoying, and if you're excited for Foundations. We'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.